במהלך ביקורה נפגשנו שוב עם הדוקטור קנטה אחמד. הנה הוא.
You are a Muslim. Would you consider yourself maybe, I don't know, a Zionist?
I would say anyone who believes in Israel's right to exist is a Zionist, and so by that definition I would be described as a Zionist. The reason I think that Israel has a right to exist is the territory of Israel was drawn up by the same statesmen that drew the territory of Pakistan.
You know that a former Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Barak, described or portrayed the situation in our area, and he said that Israel is a villa in the midst of a jungle. First of all, do you think that Israel is a villa? And secondly, do you think that we, the Israeli, living in a jungle around us?
I think that's an interesting image. I don't know why he would have used that. I don't think it's for me to say whether I think Israel is a villa. I think it's for the Israelis to say. I will say in this region, particularly at this time, the one stabilizing hope for the region is the functioning democracy that you have in Israel. Many will criticize me for saying that Israel has a democracy. Let's say many people who are anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist or have other policies that or feelings. But the democracy I saw here in Israel with my friend Mr. Zev Bielski, who you know was formerly a member of the Knesset, is one that gives representation to every minority, of every religion and every color, and also people who are not able-bodied are all functioning in this democracy. Israel itself has given legitimate right for people to build mosques, for people to attend religious schools, and for people to have their cases settled in Muslim courts. None of this exists anywhere in the Muslim majority world that I have seen. Perhaps the most stunning example that I came across in Israel was in Haifa, which I'm sure you're familiar with, when I met the Muslim leadership of the Ahmadi Muslim community, which is a very well-established Muslim community here in Israel, present since the 1920s. In Pakistan, the world's first Muslim community, world's first Muslim democracy, Pakistan, Ahmadi Muslims are not allowed to call their places of worship mosques. They're not allowed to give the call to prayer, and they're not allowed to greet other Muslims with the salam. In Israel, Ahmadi Muslims can do all of these things and even disseminate their literature. So you tell me, does that sound more like a villa than a jungle? I would say yes, it sounds more like a villa and a lot less like a jungle. To describe the surrounding region, which is dominated by Gulf Arab countries and on the other side Middle East, North African countries and their manifestations of Islam, we see a severe lack of human rights in that region for women. Whenever we say women, people always forget girls. Before you're a woman, you're a little girl. There are severe lack of rights for minorities, which in this era, in the 3 years into the Arab awakening, terrible suffering on the Christian community, terrible destruction of Christian churches in Egypt particularly. We know of, I think, 60 or so churches that have been burned. I don't know that I would call the region so much a jungle as a region that is ablaze. It is ablaze, and you are an isolated area that is surrounded by wildfire at the moment.
Dr. Ahmed, I read an article in which you were portrayed as a Zionist in a Muslim guise. What do you think about this description?
I don't think there is anything about me that is a guise. You see what you get. I am a Muslim, and I'm also a Muslim that is a product of two democratic societies. I'm a Muslim by birth, and I am raised by Muslims. I was born in London, and I was raised by Muslims. I am not chastised by my family for coming here and seeing here, though there are many who would like to tar me in their eyes with these words. Words don't hurt me. And my feeling is the whole idea of an Arab boycott of Israel, these 22 countries that don't want to interact with Israel, the only people that are suffering as a result of that are the Arabs themselves. If you don't interact with another entity, you have no means of learning from it, and even less means of ever influencing it. So this is a very archaic view to say because she recognizes Israel, she's not a valid Muslim.
Maybe there are people who are saying that you are betraying your own religious creed.
In my religion, I know the 5 pillars of Islam very well, and 2 things that do not come in the 5 pillars of Islam is anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism is not in the pillar of Islam, and neither is violent jihadism in the pillar of Islam. So my relationship to Israelis or Israel, or even more broadly to Jews or Judaism, in no way conflicts with my fundamental belief. Remember, I've lived in Saudi Arabia, so I have lived for several years in Riyadh, which was my first encounter of living in a place where there is homogeneous faith. There is no other religion manifested or uttered. It is an environment without diversity, though there are people of different denominations living in Saudi Arabia. The Shia particularly live with some difficulty in Saudi Arabia because they are not allowed to publicly identify as Shia. There are Christians who are foreign workers who work in Saudi Arabia. They can only worship in embassy or consulate or in the privacy of their homes, and even then at some risk.
You know, Dr. Ahmed, that Israel is rather isolated internationally. What is your medication for this phenomenon?
The best response to this, if I was with the leaders of Israel, is to reclaim ownership of the narrative. Nowadays, the narrative of any situation, you are asking about the state of Israel, narrative is there for the grabbing. It's nobody waits to give you the narrative, what is the story of Israel. You go and you write it and you publish it and you disseminate it, and you do so by educating as many people as you can encounter in as many fields. You begin with your own people. I think this is a good point to mention, that many colleagues who are more informed than I believe a 2-state solution is emerging. Peace process is reactivated now. There has been some opening exchanges to prepare the ground for negotiation. But these feelings and this hostility towards the state of Israel is not going to end because there is a 2-state solution.
No?
I don't think so. And the reason I would say that is some of the envy, particularly that I notice in academic circles, or let's say in the British or European media, which nowadays is reframed as anti-Zionism, not anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is distasteful, anti-Zionism somehow is an acceptable political position. I don't think that is going to go away. And the reason it won't go away is because Israelis give them a legitimate source of enormous envy. Don't underestimate the power of envy. And I mean this is a very fundamental or basic idea. Much of our misery in the Muslim world is because of Muslim countries, Muslim individuals, Muslim leaders unable to provide them with the opportunities that secular democracy has been able to give other societies, and they see no way out. That's why if you cannot accomplish what you see your rival or competitor or neighbor doing, the only thing you're left to do is to envy, and envy is damaging to the focus of envy as well as it is to the person from whom the envy is emanating. That's why even when you settle concerns about 2 states and nations, Israel is not going to be any less accomplished, any less talented, any less rich in intellectual energy. In fact, it may be even more so, with more freer exchange of ideas and less political tensions. But that is not going to take the central resentment to the success of Israel in 65 short years away from onlookers.
You were talking like a psychologist, like a doctor.
Well, I do my best.